Are we racing too quickly towards the future of artificial intelligence without considering the consequences? Well, today on Tech Talks Daily, we're going to explore the world of generative AI, but most importantly, the angle we're taking today is the security challenges that it poses. Because joining me today is Sam Curry, CISO at a company called Zscaler, or Zscaler, depending on where you're listening, of course. We've had Nathan Howe on the podcast from the company, I think 3 times over the years. But today, it's Sam that's going to be unravelling the foundings of their global study, entitled All Eyes on Securing GenAI. We're going to shed some light on how organisations are currently navigating the promises and the perils of GenAI tools. But as we sail through the waves of technological advancements through digital uncharted waters, today Sam's going to guide us through the sea of opportunities that GenAI presents too. And yes, we will explore the risks that loom over businesses and some of those essential steps that we must take to secure our digital future. Now, before I get today's guest on, a quick shout out to the sponsors of Tech Talks Daily, because in today's remote first world, I think settling for outdated managed file transfer solutions means ultimately you're risking your sensitive data. But if you upgrade to Kiteworks, the gold standard in secure MFT, boasting FedRAMP moderate authorization, Kiteworks isn't just secure, it's a complete transformation of how your business handles file transfers and the communications. So say goodbye to compromise and hello to unmatched security and efficiency. And you can do that by making the switch to kiteworks.com. Visit kiteworks.com to begin. That's kiteworks.com to secure your data and empower your business. But now, let's get today's guest on. Buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Boston, where Sam Curry, CISO at Zscaler, he's waiting to join me today. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Sam. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Neil. So my name is Sam Curry. I am VP and CISO for Zscaler or Zscaler. And yeah, most of my day is spent buried, I think, at least hip deep in cybersecurity of various flavors. I've been in cyber for, I'm ashamed to say, 31 years now. So yeah, there's that. I say I'm not ashamed that I've been in it, just ashamed that it's that long. It doesn't feel like it was that long, Neil. So, but I've been a CTO. I've been a chief product officer. I've been a CISO. It's for startups, for big companies. RSA was one of them. CA was one. McAfee CA, I guess, isn't called CA now. But I have a number of patents in the space. I've been an architect, etc. So I'm going to shut up now because I think the conversation is probably more interesting.
No problem at all. And I'm going to break the rule first of all, because it is a tech podcast, and we're going to mention the word AI within the first few seconds. It's almost the law now, isn't it? But I mean, if we go back, just 12 months ago, we were talking about ChatGPT and GenAI being able to beat lawyers at passing the bar exam. 12 months later, we're now talking about text to video, where you can literally type any command in at all and it will automatically create a video for you. One of the things that put you on my radar was having read your recent report. I think it was All Eyes on Securing GenAI. And one of the reasons I wanted to get you on here is everyone's excited about AI. And as an ex-IT guy, there's also that side of me that knows the dangers of moving fast and breaking things. So what were the key findings in this report? I'm curious.
Well, there were a few. Yeah, I think maybe the most interesting thing is that almost everyone in the report thought that it was a significant technology, in other words, it was going to have a massive impact on their business, right? So what they said was that I think it was 95% said that in some way, shape, or form that it would have a huge impact on their business. But over half of them considered it to be one of the top risks for the business, which that seems like a contradiction, but maybe it is speaking to the rate of change and how fast this has hit us. It's disruptors when they come rarely wait on our timetable, right? And the sense is that this is going to change how we work and whom we work with. And and I think the scramble has been on to how do we get this into our organizations in a responsible way. And that was at the heart of it. There's a lot more data in the report itself, but that was the significant things. For instance, a third of organizations failed to act on security concerns. In other words, they were embracing this before they started. They were embracing this before they started to really do the security journey. I've yet to speak with a security executive or an IT executive who hasn't been part of the decision. And the remarkable thing about that is the biggest problem in cybersecurity continues to be lack of alignment with the business, meaning cyber executives in particular are seen as the people that do the firewall thing, right? Or they do they do the antivirus thing. They're off on the side, and they're not seen as business people first. And yet they were all reached out to because everyone sort of inherently knew there's something there that we have to consider privacy. We have to consider security. We're going to be putting the guts of our business into these things. How could we not? And that's new because previous disruptive technologies haven't been through that.
And there was a huge stat in that report. I think it was something like 95% of organizations are using GenAI tools. And I suspect anybody that isn't currently sat on the sidelines thinking, right, how are we going to do this responsibly and safely? So I've got to ask, for any business leader listening that's getting their ear tuned off at the moment because they want to sample GenAI, what are the most significant security challenges that they face? And how might these tools possibly be amplifying existing vulnerabilities without it wanting to pour scorn on everyone's excitement at the moment, but just doing it in a responsible way, really?
Yeah, the biggest concerns are, this is reminiscent of when we were using browsers and search engines. So, or even the cloud itself, for those who remember it, it's our data is leaving our control. Who are we giving this to? What can be inferred from it? It seems like to some extent, people have understood that data is the new commodity of choice. The phrase we hear a lot is the data is the new oil. And if that's the case, then AI is like the combustion engine. Because by the way, historically, there was an oil rush before the combustion engine. It was used for all sorts of industrial purposes, for instance, as a lubricant and as a general industrial thing. But when the combustion engine came along, that's when the value of it skyrocketed. And by the way, look, the film Flowers of the Killer Moon and the book kind of reflect the insanity as well as other insanities of that, if anybody listening is interested. And the book is excellent, by the way, because it's all from the historical record, even if it's fiction. But the real danger here is I think we kind of don't know, with all of its use popping up everywhere, how should we be onboarding this? What sorts of data should go into it under what constraints? What, if any, are the new business terms and contracts that we should have around this? And that emerges over time. And it may go as the cloud went and as search engines went, that they just become a normal part of business and we have standard ways of doing it. It may evolve differently. And we can dive into that, like how you should use it. But the fear is you're going to put your IP in there. Someone's going to be putting PII in there. And the funny thing is we've been using AI tools in the AI toolkit for a long time. GenAI is the first thing that crossed the uncanny valley. What I mean by that is the uncanny valley is as things look progressively more human, you go, oh, that's cool. And then they hit a creepy point where they're almost human. And that's where most things, if you see them, you go, oh, that's a little off. But this actually crossed it. Even though in AI terms, GenAI and LLMs, they're a big deal, but they're not that big a deal compared to some things that we can expect in the future. But it was the first thing the mass public could see that crossed that valley and could be used. And that took our culture by storm. But what's funny is, as people start to use it, they started to realize, hey, this stuff's elsewhere in the toolkits we've been using. In other words, ML has been used for a long time, machine learning. And now we realize as collectively, we should go back and look at those policies because that stuff was leaving the company already. And many people didn't realize it.
And you were talking about history there, and I feel sometimes it feels like an AI gold rush of sorts, where small to medium-sized businesses are desperately trying to avoid that shiny allure of its hype. But I sometimes reflect on some of the lessons from the California gold rush, because it was those that sold shovels and other essential supplies. They enjoyed more success than those scouring the fields looking, or the mountains looking for those specks of gold. And a quick scan through the headlines the last couple of weeks, it's things like NVIDIA's chips that are powering AI rather than the solutions of tomorrow sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah. And, the other thing is to think when you actually use some of these tools, the amount of computing required is enormous, which means the amount of energy required is enormous. So it's not just that others are selling the shovels, it's that the damage, to continue the analogy, it's not just panning for gold in the river, digging is damaging the environment in that analogy. And so responsible use of AI, ways to use it, and looking at, things like NVIDIA, and the chip makers making more efficient chips from an energy consumption point of view has a material impact on things like climate change. Yeah. So I love the lessons of history in many ways. It's not that we repeat history, it's that it rhymes. Yeah. So there's an awful lot that we can learn from it. We can also get caught up if we read too much into it, but there's a lot there. And Cory Doctorow, who's a futurist and science fiction writer, wrote an article recently that this is definitely a bubble. Now, he said, don't panic at that. And I'm paraphrasing, and it's worth looking this up online. He said, there's a lot of bubbles. The question is, does it leave value behind afterwards? Like .com was a bubble. Yeah. It caused damage, but it left value behind afterwards. So too was the telco bubble, but it left fiber optics around everywhere that people used. There have been bubbles like Enron that didn't leave value behind. And so you could look through history and find cases where it did or didn't. My bet is this is going to leave value behind. That doesn't mean people won't have fortunes made and broken, as with other rushes like the gold rush. But yeah, good observation on your part. Yeah.
Yeah, you too. Such a great way of looking at it. And I think for many business leaders listening, one of the early risks of unwittingly allowing corporate data to be fed into machine learning algorithms is a huge risk, of course. But in terms of early adoption, particularly in terms of intellectual property and customer data, is there anything you can share around what can happen when implemented without these proper security measures that we're talking about? Because I think this seems to be a big theme of our conversation already about responsible usage of AI.
Yeah, it is. Responsible use is the correct phrase, I think. And I think many people had the initial reaction of just hold it at the door. And I wouldn't do that. You're going to wind up, just like we had shadow IT, you're going to have shadow AI. And when I first said that, I threw up in my mouth a little bit. But now it's a thing and it doesn't feel quite as bad. Shadow AI will be a real thing if you do that. So what I recommend is you do some security and awareness. You get a policy about it and you tell people, here's how you do it correctly. This is the right way to engage. And just like, let's take insider trading. Yes, there are some instances where you hard stop it, but by and large, people can do insider trading, but they know they're going to get caught. There's monitoring in place. And so what you want to do is get very good at the categorization and monitoring of that and give people the tools, right? Because unlike other security threats where there's a malicious opponent, an insider, for instance, that isn't the case here. Now, there may be malicious uses like poisoning models or trying to crack the models to get the IP inside. That's different. When it comes to using them, tell people the correct tools they can use, warn them about the consequences of using the incorrect tools, and have a means by which you can have a discussion about the things that are missing that they need to do. So I need a tool for this. I need to develop with this. These are things you should be prepared to answer. And so it's important to understand what is the impact of various consumption or use of AI to your business. That's going to be based on the market. It's going to be based on rate of change, the efficiencies in the business, what your customers need. But if you hold it at the door, you're probably going to be left behind, as with most disruptive technologies and bubbles.
And with the majority of businesses eagerly adopting GenAI tools, what would you say the potential benefits as well as the drawbacks are of this trend, especially from a security perspective? Because it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's a lot of potential benefits.
Yeah. I think it was Sir Tim Berners-Lee who said that the web was both the most overhyped and simultaneously underhyped technology ever. Yeah. I think that's been said of a few things. And I think that's true of any similar disruptive bubble-like technology. And I think it's true here. What we saw was, you mentioned it, you said 12 months ago. Well, if you go back 14 months,
yeah,
nobody entered 2023. By the way, I may be dating your podcast, so I apologize. But going back to the beginning of 2023, nobody thought that was going to be the thing of the year. And it became that, certainly barring, war and geopolitics, it became that in the tech world to a massive degree. And just look at the growth of ChatGPT, the fastest growing application, certainly consumer application, I think, in the history of online services. Who would have thought that by, I think it was April, they would have had 100 million paying subscribers? Crazy, right? And so the question is a really good one. I think it is how are you going to consume it, not if you're going to consume it. I don't know if that addresses it for you, but it is, given the rate at which this happened, the rate at which advances are happening, and the number of advances happening are having a combinatory effect. There's something called the law of accelerated returns. And so we have to get used to, in our business, being able to absorb and adapt to and be agile with our business changing radically in very short periods of time.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I've been doing this podcast for 5, 6, 7 years now. And one of the things that always amuses me is come November, December, my newsfeed just fills up with every self-proclaimed futurist and technologist all making those predictions for the next year. And I think it was during the pandemic, of course, nobody saw hybrid working, remote working. Primark lost, I think, was it 800 million in a month every month because they had no income whatsoever because they had no online presence. I think they also missed Zoom, of course, and Microsoft Teams. I think they ended up being worth more than all the world's airlines combined. And then last year, well, not last year, just before it came out, ChatGPT, I think it was about the October, November time, all those predictions for 2023 were all Web 3.0 and Metaverse. So we all kind of know what happened there, right?
Yeah, I saw a futurist who wrote a book about the next 100 years. He said, it's really easy to predict 100 years out. It's very hard to predict 10.
Yes.
Right. And by the way, it's hard to be held accountable for 100 years.
Yeah.
You can be held accountable for 5 or 10 years. In the cyber world, we actually have to deal with opponents, right? It's intelligent adaptation. And I've done sort of what are the risks to GenAI presentation and the technologies you can use to defend against those risks. One of the things that bugs me a lot is when people make these prophetic guesses as to which threats will be the big ones. Because if you're right and people actually respond to your prediction, you will be wrong as the bad people choose other things.
Yeah.
Right. So are you doing it to be a smarty pants and say, see, I told you so? Or are you doing it because, if you do it and people actually listen to you, then they won't listen to you again. And so the kinds of predictions that are useful are projections of trends that help you make strategic decisions rather than tactical things like I am foreseeing the use of exploits of X or Y, or, everybody should be prepared for, an increase in SQL injection attacks. Well, if everybody did that, it would be a waste of resources.
Yeah. And another thing that I noticed last year, I was going to tech conferences all around the world, and every tech conference in the first 6 months of the year was suddenly changing their agendas to say, hey, this isn't new. We've been working on this all year, and we've got a new product coming out towards the end of the year. But I mean, when there is such a rush for this next big thing to get that AI narrative against their business and brand so they remain relevant, despite all those acknowledged security risks, where do you stand on that, and what can be learned from the past technological adoptions in this context? I'm not sure if there's any similar comparisons around the dangers of rushing into new tech.
Well, there's always dangers rushing into new tech. Here's people aren't going to like this answer. Yeah. It's that it will start to produce results when it's boring.
Yeah.
And the reason I won't like it is like, oh man, that's dull, because how am I going to know? It's going to be boring. I won't be paying attention. It's that it's like the people who first got in self-driving cars. I think I heard someone say the first 5 minutes were exhilarating. After that, I was bored.
Yeah.
Right. Because now what am I? I'm in the car. It's driving. Okay. So what? The novelty of it wore off. And I actually tell people, I trust AI, not when someone uses what I call inductive use, which is a giant pulsating brain that you put data into, it's what I would refer to as deductive use. It is the instance where it becomes a useful cog in a machine, might be a machine made up of other cogs or another orchestrated system of applications of the AI toolkit. And I use that phrasing very purposefully because that's when it is using and generating business results. For instance, in cyber, it's helping me with anti-malware. It's helping me with data protection. It's helping me with authorization policy. So it's helping me with GRC. It's helping me with very specific things, in other words, that I can count on as reliable functions in a system. And by the way, if it's a co-pilot, that's great. If it's helping me with naming things in a deception context, that's great. These are all great uses, but I can wrap language around that from a contractual purpose. I can talk to a vendor about why they take the data and what they do to it. But a giant pulsating brain that is going to be everything in cyber, I don't trust. And I don't know who sees it. And I can't talk to a vendor about, so what are you going to do with the data very easily? They're just going to say, trust me. No, thank you. Right? It's when it gets to that specific use later in the game where it's fairly boring, but it's generating business results. That's interesting. Now, in the meantime, I would advise businesses as you onboard this stuff to create a committee or a panel. And it doesn't, not for bureaucratic purposes, but to monitor these rapid changes and to, much like you would do in a hospital doing research, you would say, which ones are we going to bring in that we're going to enter into our practice? Which ones are we going to say we're not going to do right now? And how are we going to change our processes and things like our security reviews, our privacy reviews, our attestations? Which are the ones that we're going, what data are we going to put into it and not put into it? And that's a moving target. And so that's why I would say convene once a quarter and have projects that are looking into this, because there's a plethora of small companies generating new applications of this technology. It's worth staying on for the business.
And sticking with that security mindset that we have right now, how does the lack of monitoring and proper data classification in GenAI tool usage, how does that impact an organization's overall security posture?
Well, it can be done, by the way, and it is done, and it will get done better over time. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that at Zscaler we in fact do that. But if you don't have the capacity or the capability to do it in a practice, then you can't get fine-grained in the policies. You can't get, for instance, let's use an analogy. If you have a hospital and you're doing surgery and you don't know what the tools can do, then maybe there's a new scalpel. I'm not a doctor, but maybe there's a new medicine for anesthetic. Maybe there's a new way of keeping the theater clean. Then it changes the kind of surgery you can do and the benefits you can give your patients. And so the hospital policy about what kind of hospital you are changes. What types of grants you can do, what kinds of research you can do, what kinds of services you can give the community, the cost of those things. So the tools affect what you can do from a business perspective, and the demands of the business affect what tools you use. So if you're not looking into and being able to do things like data classification and granularly, then you can't, for instance, say this type of data doesn't go anywhere unless it's this group. And even in that group, it shouldn't under these circumstances. So that level of control becomes trivial when you can do that right. And you shouldn't be having to, for instance, go into an eternal project of tagging everything. That's a useful tool. But this gives us the ability to do so in a closer to real-time manner with a high degree of certainty. So in other words, you're not going to interrupt legitimate business. You're going to be able to say, well, now that is part of the fabric of what we're doing, we can now actually write policy and use it and move on with business. The tools, in other words, aren't soaking up our time and the processes. Instead, the tasks we want to be performing as a business are where we put our energy.
And I must admit, I come from a time where IT used to be seen as the guardians of the network. The team that say no more than yes, and yes take too long.
It should be no, K-N-O-W. It should be K-N-O-W, not N.
And also, of course, take too long to deliver projects. But now I think it's increasingly seen, or maybe I'm too hopeful here and optimistic, but I think they're seen as the business enablers. So looking forward, how do you see the role of IT in maybe driving adoption of GenAI tools rather than just saying no? And how does this impact the overall strategic approach to security and privacy concerns across an organization?
Well, I think IT has to go through a transformation, as does cybersecurity, and DevOps has been through one, and there's going to be another one. So what we want to do is to have IT move from being custodians of the infrastructure to being brokers of services, right? That's the ideal place to be. I mean, there will always be somebody with a spanner or a screwdriver, right? I mean, but it shouldn't consume most of our time, and it shouldn't be everyone. So what we want to do is to go from perhaps 70% of our time managing the infrastructure and 30% on the quality of the services, and flip that around to begin with. What if we only spent 30% of our time managing the infrastructure and troubleshooting it? What could we do with the time we freed up to provide better quality services? Now, what happens when that can be 10%? That's an interesting thought. So how do we use these technologies, and how do we use new architectures like zero trust architecture? How do we do that? And when we do it, how does it up-level what it means to be an IT person in the first place?
100% with you on that. And we want to have people listening from all over the world and a lot of business leaders. So as someone that's very passionate about this space, what steps should any organizations take to ensure their to secure their Gen AI tool usage? And how do you, with your is it Zscaler or Zscaler? It all depends.
It does. It depends on where you are, to be honest. And so either is fine. So your question was how do you make sure that it's secure? Is that it?
Yeah. And how the Zero Trust Exchange platform can maybe contribute to that process too?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say, I'll answer the general case and then the specific case with respect to Zscaler or Zscaler. So first of all, secure is not a binary state.
Yeah.
And people need to be aware of that. And so it's not a buy 3 secures and you're good, right? Instead it is about the active practice of security as part of the business. The most important thing you can do is close that gap between security and the business. There's an opportunity with this to do so, and to invite the security department, and there's a responsibility on the part of the security department to show up and do this right, into business conversations. And that means, to some extent, cyber has to care about non-cyber things, right? They have to care about what the business cares about, and it has to influence the cyber program. But the business could welcome them in, and then whoever the chief information security officer is, has to begin to think of themselves as a business person first and realize they're always going to be a security person. That's not going anywhere. Everyone knows that the smartest security person around. Put that to one side and become a business person and be seen as that. It's about lateral relationships. That will go a really long way, because I believe that leadership teams are fundamentally problem-solving teams. And when they have trust, which means that they align with each other, they talk. The credibility and reliability things that people usually blame with lack of trust, they're not real. Honestly, by the time you're a C-level in a large organization or in a mature organization, everybody knows their job and you can count on them, right? Otherwise they wouldn't be there. What it requires is alignment and discussion and intimacy at that level. And then they are fundamentally problem-solving teams, and this is a problem they will solve. So that's the general case. When we start to get more specific, it means not going straight to the tools first. It means the right architectures. And I'm a big believer in having a simplified, transformed IT infrastructure and security infrastructure, which is where the Zero Trust Exchange comes in. And so that's one of the things we do to help people do that. And what's important there is you have to start removing options for attackers. You have to start taking yourself out of the equation. The business way to summarize that is only enable what the business needs when it needs it. The word only is hard, but the closer you get to that with your controls and your infrastructure, the better. It becomes more serviceable. It becomes cheaper. And frankly, the risk goes down as the amount of inherent trust goes down. It's a paradigm shift in how you think. So I hope that answers it. If you want to get technical, we're actually an authorization tool at scale doing fine-grained authorization. And so every request is uniquely resolved according to policy. And we resolve that close to the edge. And so you get the best pathway from a quality of service perspective, from a security perspective, and you can write policy that it is interpreted to say what should people be doing at any point in time. And on top of that, you can now start to build value. You can look at the data and you can make data classification decisions as part of that policy. You can do risk scoring. You can look for malware. You can do sandboxing. You can do firewalling in a virtual sense for every connection in the company, users, devices, workloads, etc. So that's what we do.
I think that's an incredibly powerful moment to end on. But before I do let you go, a big thank you for sharing your insights. But I want to see if there's anything else you can share with us today, because I always ask my guests to leave everyone listening with one final gift. And that is either a song that we can add to our Spotify playlist that means something to you, and a book that we can add to our Amazon wish list that you'd recommend. All I'm going to ask you is, though, what would you like to leave everyone listening with and why?
Well, I think I'll give you both. Yeah, and I'll give you both, because the song that I would recommend is a counterculture song. So I'm Canadian originally. Yeah. I say originally because I became an American as well. So the song is the 2112 Overture by Rush. Rush is a Canadian. It's only 3 people in the band, by the way, which is amazing when you hear it, all the tempo changes and things. They did this song, and it's longer, so you may not want to put it on Spotify, or you may, because they were told short songs sell. And they didn't want to make just some candy that ear candy that you can digest. Not that there's anything wrong with that. They wanted to tell a story. And the late Neil Peart was an amazing, he was an amazing drummer. Truly, if you look him up on YouTube, he's incredible. He loved science fiction, and he wrote as well. He actually put together a story around this, and it is in the future, and it is about a dark age that music comes and brings light to. And so if you know that story, I highly recommend reading it, then listening to it, and you'll hear something very different, as well as the music being amazing. The second recommendation is a book. And so the theme between these is dark ages. And I think it's relevant as we talk about data and what data is kept or not kept, and what history is, and what role AI plays in that. And this is going backwards in time rather than forwards. It's 1177 BC by Eric Klein, and it's about the late Bronze Age, which has so many parallels to us today. You really have to read it to see it. It is a globalized world, which is hard to believe in that time frame, but globalization refers to how many hops it is between any elements in an economy or a culture. And so it doesn't have to mean around the world. It meant things like ancient Egypt, the Hitler, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
It collapsed, and it left a dark age from about 1200, actually literally 1177 BCE, through, think of it as maybe 400 or 500 BCE. And there's this gap in the historical record there, which nobody fully understands what the main trigger was. But the history that's written in stone is fascinating, literally in stone. And so I would recommend those two things. And I think there's so many lessons from both, as well as them both being cool stories. One is, of course, future and fiction, and the other one is past and history.
Wow, you've spoiled us today there.
There you go.
Not only some classic prog rock, but also an intriguing book for us to check out.
It is prog rock. Well played. Yes, sir.
So I will get that song added to the Spotify playlist. I would just immerse myself in it more than anything as well.
It is 20 minutes. It's an investment. It's an investment for the years. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's 22 actually. Yeah.
As you were talking, I was trying to think of some Rush songs. I remember, was Tom Sawyer, was that there?
It was, yeah. And Roll the Bones, Tom Sawyer, yeah. And YYZ. Yeah, sorry, as a Canadian, I use both interchangeably, but yeah. A lot of Canadians are out there going, it's Zed right now.
Yeah. Well, you're talking to a Brit, so that gives you a pass, I think.
Yeah, my parents were Brits, so I can do that too.
And for anyone listening, just wanting to find out any more information about you, your work, the Zero Trust Exchange platform we mentioned, or contact you or your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
Well, for everything, Zscaler or Zscaler.com.
Yeah,
I invite everyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. I will help people. I believe in paying it forward in our industry. So if anyone's trying to break into cybersecurity, or if they have questions about something that they heard here or anywhere, please just message me. It seems like LinkedIn is becoming the professional network for social media. So reach out and I will connect you and help you make connections within Zscaler. And by the way, I made a conscious choice to come here to Zscaler because I actually decide where to go on the basis of the impact that we can have. And so far, the opponents in cyber conflict have been advancing faster, and all we're doing is incrementalism in the cyber industry. And when I looked around for something that could change the equation, where I want to put my weight, it's here. And so it's great people, it's great tech, and it actually makes a difference. I couldn't ask for more.
Well, again, thanks for joining me today. I learned so much about how organisations are approaching GenAI tool usage, the security implications it's having, some of the security concerns, where they're coming from, and how IT can take back control of GenAI use and make sure it's used securely. And that word we kept using there, responsibly. Just a big thank you for sharing that with me today.
Thank you, Neil.
So as we draw our conversation to a close today, I think it's clear that the journey towards embracing GenAI in business is fraught with both unparalleled opportunities and a significant amount of risk too. But Sam Curry from Zscaler has illuminated that path forward for us today, and I think it's so important that he emphasised the importance of strategic adoption, vigilant security measures, and also because, yes, the digital landscape is evolving, and so must our approaches in securing it too. But the big question is, what steps will your organisations take to harness the potential of GenAI responsibly? I'd love for you to share your thoughts with me today, whether that be on the generative AI phenomenon, unpacking the studies finding that we drew from today, or navigating the security landscape. How are you exploring the specific security concerns raised by GenAI adoption? And what is the role of IT and your future outlook around the main drivers of GenAI adoption and pondering the shift towards IT as a strategic partner in business innovation? We covered so much in 30 minutes there. So if you want to continue the conversation, please, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm just at Neil C. Hughes. Let's carry this conversation on. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You've heard from me. You've heard from Sam. This is your true calling. Let me know. Other than that, I'll be back tomorrow with another topic of how technology is transforming our lives, business, and even world. Hopefully you'll join me again. But thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.